Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Current administration, the 45th President of the United States, is in the Oval Office today, exclusively, fully, entirely based on lies and deception. Ironically, Mr. Trump managed to convince millions between Democrat and Republican, it was very easy, be it for the President of the United States or the Republican legislators to win that round. But it was not a fight between Democrat and Republican. It was never a fight between Democrat and Republican. The big fight to save our country, the big debate, the big discussion has always been between knowledge and ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represent the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the 4th branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the 4th branch program. Today we have for you a very important program. First, we're going to discuss how our democracy has been in serious jeopardy. And in part 2, we will discuss the war on blacks. In continuation with the discussion of the slave trade, we will introduce a very important part of the topic, which is rebellion. We will discuss it in general today, but at the very least, we will begin the discussion of such. First, our democracy has been in serious jeopardy. No, it did not start with Donald Trump, and it did not start with the 2016 presidential election. Of course, it has been exacerbated by the presidency of Donald Trump because a number of norms have been trashed, our constitution has been violated, and the rule of law seems to be no longer. And this is a recipe for any system of democracy to crumble. Does anybody care? Certainly, there is a large sector of the population that has been screaming against what has been going on in the country. But there is the smaller sector of the population that has been supporting the idea of destroying our democracy, has been helping doing exactly that. And the question is, who are those people? Are they American? Are they stupid? Are they ignorant? Who are they? And why are they helping destroying the very reason that people from the world across leave their country to come to the United States of America? Who are those people? Do they even understand what they're doing? Do they care what they're doing? Yes, democracy in America is in serious jeopardy. So stay tuned as we will continue this conversation and show you why it is important, no matter which political party you belong to, not only to be aware, to be concerned, but also to do something about it. Because you may not live long enough to see the danger of having a country without democracy, but your kids, your grandkids may suffer of such situation. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Hello again, I am MD and you are on the Fourth Branch program. I alluded earlier that a number of people, millions of them for that matter, are on the wrong side of the system that we have in this country, which is the system of democracy. They are the one who are doing everything that seems possible to destroy that very lifestyle. People from the world over travel to the United States for one simple reason. It is a country that has the rule of law. It is a country that promotes freedom. It is a country that provides shelter to those who are politically haunted, who have political problem elsewhere. So why in the world citizens of the United States are involved in helping a rogue agent, the President of the United States, to destroy that way of life. Now, this is not just a statement for the sake of making that statement. First, let me read a paragraph that I extracted from an article that I posted a couple of days ago, which read that the myth about the greatness of Ronald Reagan. The article started this way. I'm not going to read the whole article, but that will give you a gist of what not only that is about, but as to what can identify to what's going on today. Republicans have always beat the drum of being members of a political party which stand for greatness, defenders of the republic, religious and fiscally conservative. In reality, those are words that Republican leaders have never lived by. They always spend and increase the national debt like drunk lovers. They are or they provide support to corrupt individuals. They will sell the country to the highest bidder in a heartbeat. And their level of morality is nothing to be desired. Their action never match their words. Abraham Lincoln said, "You can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time." Although the country begins to recognize the Republican leaders for who they really are, the Republican constituents, however, continue to believe they belong to a party which has values it no longer holds. Democracy is not just a word that you just toss around to make yourself feel good. It is a system that guarantees not only the freedom of its citizen, but also that protects that freedom. And two major aspects of such freedom that we can put our fingers on is, number one, the fact that we can go to the poll and vote elected official in office or remove them from office. And the second aspect is the freedom of speech. We can say, we can express what we feel, we can protest against the government, and so on. Now, people who live in countries that do not have this system of democracy, usually they have dictatorship, they have authoritarian regime, they fight tooth and nail to have that. A lot of those people lost their lives fighting to have freedom. We have it here in the United States of America. But for reasons that are beyond logic, those very people that enjoy the freedom that we've had for centuries now are doing what seems to be action to destroy that way of life. Now, the framers of the Constitution did have in mind that at some point the country may have a rogue president, someone who may not care about those things, who may not care about our way of life, who may not care about the freedom that we enjoy, who may not care about the rule of law. Ironically, today we have exactly that individual in the Oval Office. Someone who would want to do away with our system of democracy. And this is not just pure talk. Donald Trump, since day one, has tried everything humanly possible to destroy our system of democracy. He has tried to get rid of the media, at the very least to silence them, to, if not, to make them irrelevant. And he continued to do so. He called them fake news. But this is not the most troubling part of it all. It's the fact that, number one, the very people who supported him, who elected him in office, are ignorant enough not to understand that what Donald Trump is doing is not funny. He's destroying our way of life. He's destroying the very system of democracy that we've enjoyed. And I guarantee you, many millions of those same individuals, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents left their country to come here because the United States offers a system of democracy that they like, they enjoy. But today, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren are behind the idea of destroying that way of life. This is not funny. Donald Trump represents everything that is not the United States of America. It is bad enough that millions of individuals could not see clear that he is incompetent. But now, having seen what he stands for, they continue to cheer him. They continue to support him. This is not about Democrat or Republican. This is beyond politics. This is an individual who would want to do away with the system of democracy we have here in the United States of America. And this is not just a sentence. Every action that Donald Trump has taken since being president of the United States gears toward erosion of our system of democracy. He has tried to he has trampled rule of law. He has trashed our Constitution, the very document that guarantees that freedom that we've enjoyed, the very document that gives us this pride to talk to other nations and tell them that, yes, we have freedom and we can bring that to you. Donald Trump has trashed the U.S. Constitution, trampled the rule of law, and tried to delegitimize freedom of expression. This morning, a very renowned historian, John Mecham, or Mesham, I'm not sure of the pronunciation of the last name, but he's a very well-known historian, contemporaneous. He talked earlier on MSNBC, and he said that we are currently witnessing treason evolving right under our nose. Yes, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is now, by the definition in our Constitution, a traitor. Now, this is no news to me personally because I wrote about that quite a while back. You can read about that. Traitor in the Oval Office. That was the title of the article that I wrote pretty much a couple of months after Donald Trump took the oath of office. Because it was already clear to me that Donald Trump is not the president of the United States. In fact, I wrote several articles to that effect. One of such says US president is now Secretary of Russia. Now, what it takes a little bit of time for everyone to realize that's the case, including a renowned historian, but Donald Trump has always worked against the interests of the United States. That's not what he says when he talks. Obviously, he managed to convince millions of people that he is for the United States of America. Ironically, just a few days ago, one such individual I was having a conversation with seems to think Donald Trump is a patriot. Yes, he is a supporter of Donald Trump. Yes, democracy in America is in serious jeopardy. Now, as if that's not bad enough, that we have someone in the Oval Office who is, by the very definition in our Constitution, a traitor, and we have millions of people who are not smart enough to see that. But on top of that, we have a Republican legislative body who has been supporting and defending a traitor in the Oval Office. The Republican Party as a whole, from the individual in the Oval Office to the legislative body who is supposed to put a check on the executive branch, and to the people who support and voted for Donald Trump, the whole Republican Party represent a danger to our democracy. This is not laughing matter. Yes, every time that a conversation is to be had about this very problem that our country is confronting, it turns into a match between Democrat and Republican. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a campaign, a political campaign. This is not a fight between Democrat and Republican. This is a serious matter. This is the very core of our country, the very core of our government is in jeopardy. You have Trump in the Oval Office, the people surrounding him defending his action, although it should be very obvious to them that this is serious problem for the country, but they defending him. And you have the cheerleaders, the people who supported and voted for him, could not even see clear that our democracy is in jeopardy, is under attack. But we have the legislators, Republican legislators in Washington, those who also took off of office to protect the Constitution of the United States. Those individuals are also involved in supporting the idea of a president that's undermining the rule of law, that undermining our Constitution. This is very serious. And the question is, why? Now, I can label Donald Trump supporters as ignorant. They don't know what they're doing because it's their very ignorance that get them to vote for someone who is incompetent. There is no doubt about that. Now, there is a lot of argument and a lot of people are trying to dance around the issue. They don't want to label the devil by its name. It's ignorance, pure ignorance. There is no way around it. The ignorance put Donald Trump in the Oval Office. There is no reason to try to butter that up. Because unless someone was completely ignorant of the truth, because if you've been following me, if you've been reading my publication, you would notice that I wrote a number of articles actually supporting Donald Trump candidacy, defending Donald Trump when he won the nomination. But I wasn't blind to say that Donald Trump should be president of the United States. I was defending simply the system of democracy. Yes, he had every right to run for presidency of the United States. This is part of our system of democracy. He met the criteria. He ran unorthodox campaign. He managed to knock everybody out, and he won the nomination. In our system of democracy, he ought to be the nominee. Yes, there are ways to deny him such. But if you want to stick to the way that we have been doing things in this country, then he won the nomination. Then I argue the point that we could not deny him the nomination. But that was where my support stopped. My support was not so much for Donald Trump. My support was for the system of democracy we have in this country. And today, since actually January 20th, 2017, our democracy has been under attack constantly, regularly, daily, by the very president whose primary job is to protect that. And the Republican legislature in Washington turned it into a fight between Democrat and Republican. It was never a fight between Democrat and Republican. It has always been a struggle to preserve the system of democracy we have. And the president of the United States, whose primary job is to do that, relinquished that job, but instead has been working aggressively to undermine our democracy. And Republican legislators have not done anything to prevent that from happening. In fact, quite a few of them, people in leadership in the Republican Party, actually have worked with the president to undermine our democracy. This is not partisanship. There is a time for politics, but our democracy is what must be priority number one for whoever is elected official. That should be number one priority. And if it is not, that individual doesn't have a place in our system of government. If a legislator, Democrat or Republican, doesn't understand that our democracy, our constitution, the rule of law are priority, they do not deserve to be a member of the legislative body. Now, it is sad enough that the people who are making those decisions do not have the intelligence to understand that. It is already sad that's the case. So we cannot look at that, what's going on in the country today, as if it is a Democrat and Republican issue. It is not. The country is today going through the worst or one of the worst period in its existence. Now, a number of people have tried to compare Donald Trump with Richard Nixon. Now, I understand the comparison. I understand why, because of his reaction, because of his behavior, because of his words. I understand that, but there is no comparison whatsoever. Richard Nixon did something that was local, that was domestic. Donald Trump has undermined our democracy by collaborating with a foreign government, with foreign entity. This is no comparison whatsoever. As John McComb said earlier today on MSNBC, we are close to be looking at a traitor in the Oval Office. This is no small matter. Our democracy has been undermined, but what makes it worse is the fact that all the Republicans in Washington, not some, all the Republicans in Washington have joined the bandwagon undermining our democracy. I'll read to you again what I read earlier in that article that I just published. Republicans have always beat the drum of being members of a political party, which stands for greatness, defenders of the republic, religious, fiscally conservative. In reality, those are words that Republican leaders have never lived by. And he's one of the bulleted points in that paragraph. They will sell the country to the highest bidder in a heartbeat. And they have proven again for the past 2 years that this is exactly who they are. And I've been saying this over and over. Donald Trump did not make Republican Party what it is today. What Donald Trump did is to help expose the Republicans for who they really are. So don't put it on Donald Trump as if he is the reason Republicans are the way they are. No, Republicans are exposed for who they really are. And Donald Trump is the individual who helped to do that. Yes, Donald Trump has its own devil. But Donald Trump did not make the Republicans who they are today. He simply helped to expose them. This, folks, is serious matter. The President of the United States is corrupt, is a crook, is a liar, is a criminal. Now we're looking at a traitor in the Oval Office. This is not a shocking thing for me. As I mentioned, I already wrote about that several times. Traitor in the Oval Office. The US President is Secretary of Russia. I have written many times about that. But now we have a renowned historian that says that is exactly the case. Our democracy is being undermined by a foreign agent, President of the United States. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
Don't go anywhere. The fourth branch program will return in just a moment.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment. War on blacks. I ought to, every time that I start this program, to provide a little bit of background on this particular topic, war on black, is a topic that we will be debating for quite some time. And the purpose is to discuss race relation in America. Now, we already established, and we would like to invite you to take a look at the People Branch YouTube channel, where we have many episodes that we already have archived there. We have an introduction that either 5 or 6 video. They're long video, but they're very interesting video to watch. I mentioned that the purpose of War on Black is to keep the conversation about race relation in America in the forefront of the conversation, in the forefront of the mind. Because the only time it seems that a conversation about race relation in America emerges in the media is after a black individual has been gunned down, executed by a police officer, and every expert comes from under the rocks to say we need to talk about race relation. And they all go back under the same rock until the next tragedy, and so on and so forth. So blacks have been, casualties on the black side have been mounting. And for that reason, we choose to discuss war on blacks and explain where racism and discrimination, which is a big part of the war being waged on blacks, a big, huge tool used by the white society. Now, we also mention and we understand that there are 2 major groups in the white community. There are those who would like to see nothing good happen for blacks, that they stay, quote unquote, in their place. They are racist and they discriminate. There are millions of those individuals. There are also the other group who would like to see a system, a society where every individual is looked at, judged by his action, not by the color of his skin. Now, those individuals, those whites, they are not racist and they do not discriminate. Now, we know that because that has been the case for as long as this republic has been in existence. We even mention about those who did not, during the time that they could have owned slaves, they did not own slaves. And we also mention Civil War. When the Civil War erupted here in the United States of America, there were millions of whites who would put their lives to keep slavery around. Those are the racists, the bigots, and those who discriminate. And there were also millions of whites who fought side by side with blacks in order to end slavery. So we know this is a very sensitive topic because the very individual that usually the way to gauge as to where a white individual is very simple. During a conversation, you can clearly tell where they stand. Now, those who are always dismissive of the problem, because there are those who are always dismissive of the problem, dismissive of the severity of the problem, or dismissive of the widespread of the problem. And I always ask the very question, which is a good question to ask. The racism and discrimination are not practiced by just the white nationalists and the KKK, because this is a very small group. There are not that many of those individuals, which means if we're talking about that across the nation, we're not talking about that small group. We're talking about millions of whites who discriminate. Now, we are working our way towards showing as to why this problem still lingers in the United States of America. Now, we started by following the money. And by that, we mean, why do we have that problem? It started with the slave trades. Slave trades was more At least that's the way it began, more of a financial transaction than anything else. Cheap labor, actually free labor, if you want to consider the fact that after purchasing slaves, then they didn't have to pay any more for those individuals. So it was more a financial aspect of the whole process. Now we're talking about slave trade. Now slave trade is an expression that doesn't really convey the horror, the horrific lives of the slave. Because all it does, it gives you a word and then you say, oh, well, that was bad for the country, but you do not understand or do not grasp how horrific this whole process was. Now, we already talked about slavery here in the United States. The first shipment of slaves came in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. That was the first time since slave trade was transcontinental slave trade begun here in the United States of America. Now, that was made possible by the fact that, of course, in 1492, Christopher Columbus came here and discovered, quote unquote, discover America. Now, slave trade has been going on since that time, 1492. But here, the United States of America, Jamestown, Virginia, the first shipment of slaves, 20 of them happened in 1619. Now, I'm not going to go over all the detail of the horror that the slave had to go through. But in order to advance to the next aspect of it, I have to at least bring that part back to the conversation. Whites who were born before and during slavery, they are, if you come from one of those lineage, that means you indirectly responsible for the problem that we're talking about today as a white individual. And the reason is because there is a high likelihood your ancestor, great grandpa, as many great you may want to add to it, but had slaves. He was slave owners. Now, the conversation we had about that particular aspect of slavery, if story get passed down to you to tell you that your ancestor was a slave owner, but he was a good slave owner, I mentioned that before. I'm not going to go through the detail, and I really encourage you to take a look at the People Branch YouTube channel for previous video. But the gist of it is that is a lie. There was no good slave owner. None. 100% false. So the story that was passed down to you from your ancestor down to your generation, whether it's great-grandpa, grandpa, father, and now you, now whatever the story, whatever that they tell you, that your ancestor was a slave owner, but he was a good man, pure lie. There was never any such thing as good slave owner. And you ought to take a look at those previous videos to understand why. But the bottom line is slave owners inflicted inhuman treatment on slaves. There is no such thing as good slave owners. When slaves disobey, they get beat until they bled. And even after the beating, they had to go to the field to work. No shirt on, whether it's scorching sun or it's cold, it didn't matter to the slave owner. That was to teach the slave lesson. The slave owner would rape black women who work in the house as household maid, not getting paid, but that was really slave doing household work at will. Yes, that ancestor that they told you was good. Would rape the black women at will. It's not that the black women had a choice. The slave owner would cut fingers, toes from the slave to teach them a lesson, especially for those who were reluctant to obey. The slaves would get a beating for slowing down because they work 18 hours a day, and as a human being, as you can imagine, that is every single day. They work 18 hours. So yes, at some point, your body has to give in. But the slave owner wouldn't hear of it. So the slave did not have any way of really even feeling sick, because he will get a beating until he bled. Now, you think that's not bad enough? The slave owner would starve the slave to death as a form of punishment. The slave would work 18 hours, little sleep, get inhuman treatment, get punished for even because his body couldn't take the daily sun, scorching sun, without proper clothing. And on top of that, the slave owner would starve the slave to death to teach them a lesson. And even when they were fed, it's not like they were fed properly either. Yes, there was no slave owner. There is no such thing as good slave owners. So this story that was passed down to you, that your ancestor had slave and he was a good slave owner, pure lie. 100% lie. Just like Donald Trump lies. That's all it is. Just lie. Now, that aspect of slavery was horrific. You know, another aspect that the slave master used to punish the slave? If they have a baby, that baby becomes a merchandise they would sell at auction. I think I may have given you that image before. Is that lady you see? That's a rendering. That's not an actual picture. That's a rendering by an artist that shows you that mother is pleading that guy on the pedestal with the baby being held in one hand, auctioning the baby. The war on blacks is not an expression, is not a theory. The war on black has been going on even before the existence of the Republic. Yes, your ancestor did that. But you know what's even Mossad, and that is the tool that is used mostly in the white community whenever it comes to blacks. It is there, and you're gonna start understanding why blacks are seen in such bad light in this country. The tools that used by whites, especially those who are racist, those who discriminate, they're the one that use the tools so often, so frequently, that by the time that we start understanding what's going on, it is way too late, because everybody now has won. We had this conversation even taking the presidency of Ronald Reagan, and we see how they look at blacks when they were talking about the welfare queen, because that was a code word for blacks. You see how far we came from slavery to today. And I use Ronald Reagan as my example, but just a few years ago, 2012, when Rick Santorum was running for the presidency of the United States, he used the same type of code word. So it is a label, a stigma on blacks that linger, that would not go away, because whites have this powerful tool in their as ammunition to use against black. Now you're going to understand very shortly what I mean by that. Whites, whether they discriminate or not, grew up with this image of blacks. In fact, a number of times that police officer executed a black individual, the first thing you'll hear the police officer say, "What is it?" "I was afraid for my life." Unarmed black man, a police officer afraid for his life? Does that make any sense to you? Of course not. But that is the white community tool, ammunition, powerful ammunition that they use every time that they need to wage war on blacks and get away with it. That's the tool. I was afraid for my life. Unarmed, black. Oh, of course. How could you not be afraid? Now, during slavery, here is where this whole thing started. You have to understand that when something is ingrained in your mind, it will take generations, many generations before this problem is corrected. Because things like that get passed from one generation to the other, to the next. Behavior, belief get passed from one generation to the next. And those whites who own slaves, those slave masters, those slave owners who own slaves, they, using the word mistreatment, is actually minimizing the kind of treatment that they inflicted on blacks. Because those treatments weren't mistreatment. There were things, as a matter of fact, you would say that treatment that if you were to do to a dog today, you probably would go to jail. Beat the slave to death, till the slave are bled, and still forced to go on the field without shirt under the scorching sun, or if it's cold, shivering cold, starve the slave to death, rape the women, and on top of that, rip the children away from them to sell at auction. And the white community has the goal to call it, they are afraid of blacks. And that's the irony of the whole thing. Blacks are construed as criminal. That's why before they even do anything, they're already suspect. They thieves, they criminal, they no good. All the labels, this is white ammunition against black. They use all the negative label for blacks that actually belong to them, because those treatment that whites inflicted on blacks, and they call blacks criminal. If a black slave tried to escape and they could not capture that black, they would shoot that black down, and they call blacks criminal. They take a family and rip the family apart. Men one place, women another place, baby sold at auction, and they call blacks criminal. And you want to know why they call black thieves? Now, I'm not saying those things to say they okay. I'm just explaining so that you understand where all this racism, discrimination, all those bad label that they have put on blacks that survive, that lingers all the way up to today, that you see politicians running for highest office continue to use those. They didn't start yesterday. They started a long time ago and continue, pass from one generation to the next. And you can rest assured, most of the people that you see using those expressions or thinking those ways, they have their ancestors who actually used to inflict those types of treatment to black. So they just get passed down and it lives on. And that's the next section we will talk about, when blacks under such treatment, because those weren't just physical abuse by the slave owners. There was also the psychological war on blacks. You take a family from Africa, they did that, and here, if that happened again, and we will see that white slave owners actually encourage the idea of family, and you'll see that in our expose. In Africa, they pick, and it was easy for those individuals who hunt for blacks in Africa to easily capture a family, because father and mother stick together protecting their kids, just like parents would do. So it's easy for those individuals who are trying to round up blacks to do that very easily. Because if one individual was single, easily can run to the mountain, hide, or even fight. But families couldn't do that because they had to protect their own. But those individuals took advantage of that, take the whole family, and if the whole family survived the journey when they came here, now they are ripped apart. Mother, it's not losing your child to death. It's someone who literally take your child from you, put you someplace, and then take that child and go and sell it someplace else. But blacks are the criminals. They tie both hands, pin on the floor, tie both feet, pin on the floor, and beat the person without shirt with a whip, enough for the person to bleed. And blacks are the criminals. See the irony? They, whites, were the one that did all those criminal things, but oh no, they're just slave owners. You know, good slave owners as passed from one generation to the other. They cut fingers to make an example, but blacks are the criminals. They cut black toes to make an example out of them and instill fear on the others, but blacks are the criminals. They shoot those who try to escape those type of mistreatment, abuse, but blacks are the criminals. They rape black women, but you know, blacks are the criminal. They're the violent one. Now, you may not grasp this problem because your ancestor has been passing from one generation to the next that he was a good slave owner. Yes, your ancestor, the great-great-great-great-great-grandpa owned slave, but he was a good slave owner. And that's the story that's passed from one generation to the next. And then you grew up knowing that, oh yes, that was a bad thing, but you know, he treated the slave well. Now, it is not true. It is 100% false. That story that was told to you by previous generation and told to him in the generation before that, all that was false. That's a story that they passed because they wanted future generation to think that was the case. And the reason for that is because, you know, your ancestors, there were religious people, you know, Christian who go to church, pray God, have food on their table, and lavishing food while the slaves are slaving 18 hours a day. But you know what? Blacks are lazy. And that's the other ammunition that they have in their repertoire. They get blacks, slaves, to work 18 hours a day without any kind of rest. And if they even hinted at the idea that they feel tired, they get beat until they bled. But you know, blacks are lazy. And that's what we know today. That's what they bring. They keep passing it down. And that's why today all the bad connotation are on blacks. They're criminals despite the fact that whites were the one inflicting doing those criminal acts on them. But it's the blacks. So they get it both ways. It's a war on blacks. There is no if and but about it. It's not a slogan. It is actual what has been happening to blacks in America. almost 400 years, whites were inflicting horrific pain on blacks. If they fight back, they're violent. Today, police officer shoot down a black. He was afraid for his life. Nothing has changed because white had done such a great job hurting blacks, waging war on blacks, to the point that even some blacks believe that's the case. Yes, war has been waged on blacks. Again, as I mentioned, if you just joined, you may not have heard it, but I've been saying it over and over and over because it is true that there are millions of whites who are racist, who discriminate, and there are millions of whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. We already know that. But when I talk in general. I don't have a way of differentiating unless I keep saying what? White racist and white non-racist. But if you've been following this topic, you would already know that I already make the distinction that there is indeed, and what caused race relation so difficult to solve, race relation problem, is because of that very fact that there are those who are racist and discriminate, and there are those who do not. And one way you can recognize today, not that they're wearing any hat that tells you that they're racist, because you could not know that. You could be at the workplace and working with one. But in conversation, they're not difficult to recognize. They still continue to act the same way those who fought in the Civil War to keep slavery around. They still continue to have that kind of language because they still want black to stay in their place. They still continue to point fingers at blacks for anything that's bad. They still continue to see blacks in very bad light. They're the one who put that on blacks, despite the fact that the one who put blacks in that predicament. They mistreated blacks. They waged war on blacks from Africa. According to history, in the 18th century alone, more than 6 million blacks were taken from Africa as slaves. 18th century alone. We're not talking about 1492 or prior. So we don't have, even a historian has a very difficult time coming with an actual number of blacks that actually they took from Africa. And the reason for that is because a number of those blacks that they rip from the continent never made it to their destination. They die on their way and they just dump them at sea. So 18th century alone, an estimation of more than 6 million blacks were taken from Africa. 18th century alone. According to history, by the time that the Emancipation Act passed, there were 4 million blacks who were freed. We're not even talking about those who were not. The South, 1/3 of the population of the South was black, slaves. Now, you may begin to understand why those slaves had to escape those type of treatment. As we continue that conversation, we will also show you that indeed the treatment were horrific. Now I start to present it to you, and as we begin unraveling the rebellion that began to emerge among the slaves, you will realize and understand why whites now have to come with a strategy. They're never in the losing end. A police officer killed an unarmed black man. He was afraid for his life. And guess what? He goes to the court and the court let him go. And that's also the other aspect we will discuss and show you why racism and discrimination linger in the country. Because it's not just a black and white issue. It is complex. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that because it needs a lot of time to unravel. It is a very serious issue that needs to be resolved. But unless you understand its origin, you can get to the roots of the problem. There is no cure for it. And that's what we're here for. To bring some cure to the whole process. Hi, I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the 4th Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. I do thank you for taking the time, for spending the time with me. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any question, or if you want to send comment, criticism, suggestion, how to make the program better, we would appreciate it. Now, if you have a topic you would like us to research and talk about, do not hesitate to contact us. We will provide the information at the bottom of this program. Once again, we do thank you for spending the time with us, and we hope to see you again tomorrow at 2 p.m. when we continue with our conversation. Have a good afternoon or a good evening, whichever that is for you. I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The 4th Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the 4th Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. The 4th Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the 4th Branch, live from New York. Good day.